She never expected the letter to find her. People like her didn't get tracked by anything official, not by mail carriers, not by bills, and definitely not by inheritance notices. But that morning, huddled with her daughter beneath the overhang behind the diner, Mara Reed watched a woman in a county jacket scan the alley with a puzzled look, holding an envelope like a nervous bird that wouldn't land. "Mara Reed!" the woman called, uncertain but committed. Mara froze. Lily, half wrapped in the patched sleeping bag they shared, tightened her grip on her mother's arm. The woman didn't look like trouble, but trouble rarely announced itself honestly. "Who's asking?" Mara said, stepping forward just enough to shield Lily with her body. The woman glanced at the envelope again. "County Probate Office. I've been trying to reach you for 3 months." 3 months, long enough for summer to die and the ground to harden under their feet. She offered the letter out. "It's about your grandmother, Eliza Ward." The name struck like a faint echo from a childhood she didn't visit often. Her grandmother's voice, the small mountain cabin, the smell of pine sap on skin. Memories like moth wings, fragile, powdery, impossible to touch without losing something. Mara took the envelope slowly. "She passed?" she asked, already knowing. "2 winters ago," the woman replied. "Her estate was delayed, complicated, but you're the last living heir. The property is yours now." The property? Mara almost laughed. Her grandmother had died poor. Her world had been a sagging mountain shack and a stubborn old horse she swore the county would never claim. Mara had always assumed her grandmother owned nothing that could outlive her. Loss had taught her that people like them inherited only debt, regret, and the shape of someone else's mistakes. Yet here was a letter with her name on it, something her grandmother had left behind, something that might be shelter for a night or a week if the roof hadn't caved in, something with a door her daughter could lock. She signed the delivery slip with fingers stiff from cold, thanked the woman, and slipped the letter deep inside her coat. Lily leaned into her. "Where is it?" she whispered. Mara opened the envelope carefully, half expecting the paper to disappear like a trick. Inside was a simple document, the deed to a piece of land in the Appalachian foothills, near a mountain whose name she hadn't spoken aloud in years. The coordinates throbbed on the page like a heartbeat. A handwritten note on yellowed county paper read, "Occupant rights valid. Beware structural weakness. Outbuilding condemned. No taxes owed until reassessment." It was the sort of bureaucratic warning that tried to sound helpful but carried a quiet hint of doom. Still, it was a place that was hers. "We're going home," Mara said, though home was a word she'd stopped believing in long ago. They gathered what little they owned, 2 worn backpacks, 1 sleeping bag, a thrift store coat that barely remembered warmth, and boarded the bus with coins scraped from the emergency jar. As the town shrank behind them, replaced by open fields and a sky that didn't care who you were as long as you kept moving, Lily rested her head on her mother's shoulder. Mara closed her eyes and let the motion steady her pulse. Going back to those mountains felt like stepping into a memory she'd abandoned on purpose. But the road didn't ask questions or demand confession. It simply carried them upward, past bare trees, past clusters of houses leaning into each other for warmth, past streams whispering in voices only the patient could hear, as the bus rattled off the last stretch of smooth pavement and began its climb toward the foothills. By the time it stopped at the end of the route, a gravel turnout near an abandoned gas station. Twilight had begun folding itself across the ridges. Mara slung their bags over her shoulder, took Lily's hand, and began the walk down the narrow mountain road she had last seen at 17. The air was sharper here, thinner in a way that forced you to breathe honestly. The forest rose in tall, quiet lines on either side. Lily's breath clouded in front of her, small but determined. What was she like, Lily asked. Grandma Eliza? Mara hesitated. Stubborn, she said. Kind in ways that didn't look like kindness. She believed the mountain taught you what you needed to learn. What did you learn? Lily asked. Mara let out a slow breath. I didn't stay long enough to find out it was true. She'd run from this place at 17, chasing work and escape, and a future that didn't smell like damp timber and old ghost stories. Her grandmother had told her the mountain held more secrets than people did, and that wasn't always meant to comfort. But now, climbing toward a house that might not even stand, Mara felt the pull of something she couldn't name. The path narrowed, growing familiar in ways her mind refused to fully acknowledge. A fallen tree she used to balance on as a child. A bend in the road where the blackberry bushes once clawed at her ankles. A gap in the ridge where the sunlight slipped through in the mornings, the same way it used to slip into her grandmother's kitchen. And then through the thinning trees, she saw it. The house, if you could still call it that. The roof sagged like a tired shoulder. Boards curled away from the frame. The porch had surrendered to gravity years ago, collapsing into a sprawl of lumber and weeds. Windows were missing or broken, leaving dark squares where eyes should have been. Mom, Lily whispered, gripping her sleeve. It's really old. It is, Mara said. But it's ours. They approached cautiously, each step sinking into the damp soil. The house loomed, weather-beaten and proud in the way of things that refused to disappear. Mara pushed open the front door, half expecting it to protest, but it swung inward with a sigh, as though the house had been holding its breath for years, and finally recognized someone worth releasing it for. Inside, dust drifted in shafts of fading light. The walls were lined with old wooden planks, their knots like patient eyes. The floor sagged but held. Lily walked in slowly, wide-eyed. It's like a story, she said, one with ghosts. Mara answered quietly, though not unkindly. The living room still held her grandmother's rocking chair, though its runners were cracked. A cast-iron stove hunched in the corner, rusted but intact. The air carried the faint smell of pine, earth, and thyme. It was cold, but not the biting cold of the alley. They were inside, and that alone felt like a miracle stitched together from scraps. Mara set their bags down near the stove and drew in a deep breath. We'll make a fire, she said. We'll be warm. They gathered fallen branches from just outside the door, snapping brittle sticks and easing them into the stove. The first spark took quickly, rising into a flame that flickered like hope, finding footing. Warmth seeped slowly into the room. Lily curled up in the sleeping bag near the stove while Mara explored the kitchen. The counters were dusty but familiar. A wooden drawer stuck stubbornly until she coaxed it open, revealing a jumble of old utensils, a corkscrew, and a folded note written in her grandmother's cramped handwriting. If you're reading this, you found your way back. Good. The mountain's been waiting for you. Mara closed her eyes as the words echoed through her. She hadn't expected this, her grandmother reaching across years with the steadiness she'd always had. She tucked the note into her pocket. She'd read it again when she was ready. Behind the kitchen, a narrow hallway led to the back of the house. The boards creaked with each step, but the house seemed to adjust to their presence, as if relearning the rhythm of feet on its floors. At the end of the hall was the bedroom Mara had once shared with her mother before they left this place behind. Dust lay thick on the windowsill. A quilt faded to near colorlessness covered the old iron bed frame. She brushed it lightly with her hand. "Mom," Lily called from the living room. "There's something outside." Mara hurried back, heart thudding. Through the cracked front window she saw a shape moving slowly across the yard. Large, lumbering, familiar in an ache-deep way she couldn't immediately place. Then, with a strange jolt, the recognition landed. "It can't be," she whispered. The old horse, her grandmother's horse, a chestnut geeling with a streak of silver down his muzzle, moving stiffly but deliberately toward the house. He looked impossibly ancient, like a creature carved from memory. But he was alive. "Mom," Lily said softly. "Is that yours?" "No," Mara said, her voice thinning. "He belonged to Grandma Eliza." The horse stopped a few feet from the porch, what was left of it, and met Mara's gaze with an expression that felt almost human, as though he had been waiting too. Mara stepped outside carefully, hands raised slightly. "Easy, boy," she murmured, though her voice shook. She reached toward him, and he lowered his head until his muzzle pressed gently against her palm. His breath was warm, steady. Lily stood beside her. "Arak." "What's his name?" "Sage," Mara whispered. "He was," she swallowed. "He was the last thing my grandmother cared for." Sage flicked his ear, then nudged Mara's coat pocket. She frowned, reaching inside, and pulled out the folded note she'd found in the kitchen drawer. The horse nudged it again, almost insistently. "What is it?" Lily asked. Mara opened the note fully for the first time. The handwriting trembled with age, but the words were clear. "If Sage is still alive, follow him. He remembers what I couldn't tell you." Goosebumps rose along her arms. Sage stepped back, turned slowly, and began walking toward the treine behind the house. "Mom," Lily whispered. Mara hesitated. The sky was darkening. The forest loomed. Following a half-go horse into the woods was not the sort of decision any rational person would make at dusk. But nothing about their lives lately had been rational. And somewhere in her grandmother's voice, buried under years of silence, was a truth she had fled, but now felt obligated to face. "Grab your jacket," Mara said softly. "We're going with him." Lily ran inside, re-emerging moments later. The horse waited patiently at the edge of the woods, tail flicking. They followed him into the trees. The forest swallowed them quickly, its canopy blotting out the last of the light. Sage's steps were slow but deliberate, never straying from a winding trail that Mara only half remembered. "Did she hide something?" Lily whispered. "Maybe," Mara answered. "Or maybe she left something she knew I'd need." The woods grew thicker, the air colder. A fog drifted low along the ground like breath that refused to disperse. After several minutes, Sage stopped before a narrow clearing she'd forgotten existed. At its center stood a structure she had never seen before or had blocked out of memory so entirely it felt new. A small outbuilding, stone, almost like a storage shed, but older than the house itself. Its wooden door hung crooked, marked with deep scratches that made Mara's skin tighten. "What is this place?" Lily asked. Mara didn't answer. Her grandmother had warned the county about this outbuilding. Condemned, the deed had said, yet it stood solid as a secret. She approached slowly. The door creaked as she pushed it open. The interior smelled of damp wood and rust, but beneath that was something else, something metallic, faintly sweet, like old minerals. She raised her flashlight. The beam cut across a room full of crates, stacked nearly to the rafters, each marked with the faded insignia of an old mining company that had gone bankrupt decades before she was born. Her heart raced. Her grandmother had always claimed the mining company stole something, from the mountain and from their family. No one believed her. Not the county, not the town, not Mara's mother who dragged her away from this place and told her to forget the ramblings of an old woman clinging to fairy tales. But these crates were not fairy tales. They were evidence, proof. She stepped forward, brushing dust from the nearest crate. Lily hovered close. "Mom, what is it?" "I don't know," Mara whispered. "But whatever it is, she hid it for a reason." She found a rusted crowbar near the wall and wedged it under the crate's lid, forcing it open with a grunt. The wood cracked. The lid fell away. Inside, wrapped in canvas, were dozens of small metal cylinders, each stamped with a date and numbers. Not numbers, coordinates. Lily leaned closer. "What are those?" Mara lifted one carefully. It was surprisingly heavy. The metal felt warm despite the cold air. She had seen objects like this in documentaries, in old geological surveys, core samples, bedrock cores, geological profiles taken from deep beneath the mountain. She unwrapped another and another perfectly preserved, untouched, taken from a company that had, according to every official record, never drilled anywhere near her grandmother's land. Mara's pulse quickened. "Mom?" Lily asked quietly. "Why would she keep rocks?" Mara swallowed hard, because these aren't just rocks. Before she could continue, Sage snorted sharply behind them, ears pinned, muscles tensing. Mara turned. The horse backed away from the shed, nostrils flaring at the darkness beyond the trees. Something moved there, not an animal, not wind. Something heavier, watching. Mara's breath caught. Whoever or whatever had been waiting was no longer patient, and her grandmother's secret was much bigger than a mountain's memory. "Lily," Mara whispered, gripping her daughter's hand. "We need to go now." Sage pawed the ground urgently. The forest grew unnervingly still. Mara shut the crate, grabbed the nearest core sample, and pulled Lily close as they stepped out into the cold air. Something cracked a branch in the darkness. Too deliberate, too close. Mara's grandmother had warned her. The mountain teaches you what you need to learn. Tonight, the lesson was beginning, and someone else knew they were here. The house waited like a held breath. The forest pressed inward. Sage nudged them urgently toward the path. Mara didn't look back. She didn't need to. She could feel eyes in the trees, and her grandmother's voice pushing her forward. The secret had been found, and the mountain was no longer silent. Mara barely slept that night. Every time the house shifted, the sound felt like someone testing the floorboards. When wind moved through the trees, it seemed to whisper her name, reminding her that the mountain held more history than she could see. She dreamed in uneasy flashes, her grandmother hauling heavy crates alone, lanterns swinging while men in company jackets turned away as if silence were part of their contract. When morning finally came, she rose exhausted. But Lily woke with the soft confidence of a child who believed that if her mother kept moving, everything might yet find balance. Frost coated the yard in pale crystals. Sage stood near the porch, breath puffing, ears pointed toward the tree-ine like a sentinel planted by the mountain itself. Mara brewed thin tea in a dented pot and set the wrapped core sample on the table beside the deed. The metal cylinder looked ordinary now, but its presence filled the room like pressure beneath stone. "What if it's nothing?" she whispered. Lily shook her head with simple certainty. "Grandma hid it. That means someone didn't want it found." Mara knew the truth carried weight, especially when buried deep. They had to find someone who could read the stone, someone the town wouldn't dismiss as quickly as they dismissed Eliza years ago. Mara wrapped the sample carefully in a towel, placing it in her backpack. Before leaving, she rested her palm against the kitchen wall. "Watch the place," she murmured. The wood stayed cool beneath her touch, but the house felt awake somehow, as though listening. Sage followed them only to the edge of the yard, then stopped, watching the tree line with the protective stillness of an animal that understood danger and lived as much in silence as in motion. The road down the mountain was slick with wet leaves, so they walked slowly, their hands brushing now and then as the morning fog thinned. Halfway down, Lily broke the quiet. "If we fix this, will it fix Grandma's story?" Mara weighed the question. "Maybe not fix," she said, "but make it heard." The town rose up below them, quiet, worn, familiar, yet changed. Buildings sagged with age, and the air carried wood smoke laced with the metallic tang of old machinery. Mara felt exposed, carrying a truth no one had asked her to drag into daylight, but turning back was no longer an option. The library smelled of dust and old paper, steady and comforting. The woman at the desk, gray hair twisted into a clip, peered over her glasses. "You look like you need answers, not directions," she said. Mara set the wrapped core on the counter. The towel fell away, and the woman's eyes widened. "Haven't seen one of those in decades." When Mara explained they'd found crates of cores behind her grandmother's house, the librarian stiffened. "Who was your grandmother?" "Eliza Ward," Mara replied. Recognition and regret passed over the woman's face. "Eliza came here once shouting about stolen land. People said she was unwell." Mara swallowed, remembering her own doubts. "She wasn't," she said quietly. "She just didn't know how to make people listen." The librarian nodded slowly. "Jim's here today. Retired geologist. Tuesdays are his map days." She returned with a tall, stooped man in flannel who handled the core like something sacred. Turning it toward the window, he studied the stone layers with careful focus. "You know where they claim this came from?" he asked. "They said their own lease," Mara answered. Jim shook his head. "Not with these coordinates. This hole sits under your grandmother's land. Off lease, off record." He pointed at a pale band in the stone. "Spodumene lithium. They knew it was here. They drilled in secret. They hid it. And they were counting on no one putting the pieces together." The librarian gasped softly. "She tried to prove it," she whispered. Mara steadied herself. "She wasn't wrong," she said. "Just alone." Jim exhaled. "You need a lawyer who isn't afraid to be loud." Harper's office occupied an old white house with a crooked sign that read, "No appointment, no problem." Mid-40s, sharp-eyed and tired, Harper listened as Mara laid out the letter, the shed, the crates, and Jim's conclusions. She inspected the core, then nodded. "Jim's the best we've got, and this stamp tells a story Fulton Energy won't want told." She slid a contract across the desk. "I work on contingency. If we win or settle, I take a cut. If we lose, you owe nothing. But this—" She tapped the core. "This has teeth." Weeks blurred into paperwork, affidavits, and interviews. Jim wrote a sworn statement about the mineral layers. The librarian dug out old meeting notes where Eliza had been dismissed as misinformed. A retired drill technician came forward with a brittle ledger detailing off-lease samples and ignored warnings. In the margin of one page, in familiar handwriting, Mara found, "Samples with E. Ward, now Mountain remembers." Their evidence grew heavier. Fulton Energy hit back with denials, blaming confusion, faulty memory, and forged stamps. At the preliminary hearing, the company lawyer implied Eliza had been unstable. Harper rose slowly. "Poverty isn't instability," she said. "It's what happens when people with power decide some voices aren't worth hearing." The room shifted. The judge ruled the case would proceed. Not long after, Mara began seeing a man in a dark parka shadowing them around town. Sometimes he lingered near their truck. Once she spotted him at the tree line by the mountain road, still as a fence post. She tried to convince herself it was coincidence, but dread settled under her ribs. The confrontation finally came on a dim afternoon when she rounded a bend to find an SUV blocking the mountain road. She stopped a safe distance away. The man stepped out, hands visible. "Miss Reed," he said. "Daniel Carter, Fulton Energy. We both know where this is heading. Let's avoid the mess." He offered a staggering sum in exchange for rights and silence. The number made her breath catch. Safety, stability, everything she'd never had suddenly within reach. "If you're offering that much," she said, "it's worth more." His eyes hardened. "Court is unpredictable. Neighbors hate scandals. A settlement keeps things peaceful." "Silent," she corrected. That's not peace. He stepped closer. You're making a mistake. Mara held his gaze. If I make one, she said, it'll be mine. He moved aside, and she drove on. Back at the house, Sage met them in the yard, ears back, body tense. Harper was furious when she heard about the roadside meeting. He's rattled, she said. If they're negotiating in the shadows, they're scared of daylight. Mara nodded. Good, let's drag them into it. The fight had grown larger than money or revenge. Harper arranged the evidence like a general preparing a siege. Jim rehearsed his testimony. The retired technician practiced reading his shaky notes aloud. Town gossip swelled. Some praised Mara, others muttered about troublemakers. One evening, Harper arrived breathless. They blinked, she said, dropping a folder on the table. They're offering a settlement. Massive. Bigger than I expected. Somebody up the chain panicked. The sum was enough to change their lives and safeguard the mountain for generations. What do they want? Mara asked. Mineral rights, Harper replied. With limits, they drill underground only. Surface land and water stay protected, and I insisted on no non-disclosure. You'll be free to talk. If we go to trial, we might win more or lose everything. Mara hovered over the paperwork, thinking of Eliza's stubbornness. The years she spent warning people who laughed at her, Lily's worn shoes, and their thin-walled kitchen. Justice mattered. So did security, and the mountain still needed a guardian. They signed, not in triumph, but in sober recognition that victories arrive in many shapes. Overnight, word spread. Reporters came. Cameras pointed toward the ridge like it was new territory. Some locals cheered, others grumbled about outsiders stirring the past, ignoring the fact that the company's trespass had begun the story decades earlier. Mara tuned out the noise. She focused on the mountain, on the house that no longer felt abandoned, on the sense that something buried had finally been allowed to breathe. The first transfer hit her account like a silent shockwave. Money didn't change who she was. It simply quieted the constant hum of fear. The roof was replaced, windows repaired. They built Sage a solid barn where the wind couldn't cut through broken boards. He looks proud, Lily said. He looks like he knew this was coming, Mara answered. The old shed became a small memorial to Eliza's fight. Jim and the retired technician mounted a plaque over the door. Eliza Ward, Keeper of Proof. Below, in smaller letters, she told the truth before anyone profited from hearing it. Schoolchildren came on field trips, guided by the librarian who now spoke of Eliza with reverence instead of doubt. She wasn't wrong, she told them. She was early. Mara watched from the doorway, heart full in a way she couldn't quite name. Even those who once mocked Eliza now admitted she'd seen what they were too comfortable to face. The mountain's story, and the town's, had shifted. The settlement no longer felt like payment. It felt like acknowledgement, a long overdue correction to the record. Winter returned quickly, snow softening the ridge and swallowing sound. Mara and Lily stood outside the shed, watching flakes gather around their boots. Do you think Grandma's secret really shook the whole town? Lily asked. Mara thought of the mayor's new water protections, the company's guarded press releases, the quiet apologies from retired miners. I think it shook the part that needed shaking, she said, and reminded people that truth buried is still truth waiting. Sage nudged them toward the warm house. Later they sat on the rebuilt porch with mugs of cocoa as the valley lights flickered on below. Are we rich now? Lily asked. Mara smiled. Rich enough to keep the land safe, she said, and rich enough to give you choices. But her thoughts drifted to her grandmother, who died with nothing but a fierce belief in her own truth. We're rich in something else, Mara added softly. We get to finish her story. Lily leaned against her, slipping her small hand into Mara's, warm despite the cold. The house creaked behind them, no longer in warning but in comfort. Snow spiraled slowly across the yard. The mountain held them with quiet steadiness, as if acknowledging a long-settled debt. Lily stared into the dim, peaceful woods. "We're home," she whispered. Mara nodded. "We are. Finally." The wind moved through the trees like a sigh of relief, carrying the truth Eliza had guarded for decades, now free, now heard, now part of the mountain's living memory.